Hey everyone, and welcome to Release Notes, a new podcast that takes you behind the scenes of Google AI. I'm Logan Kilpatrick, and in each episode, I'll be picking the brains of a bunch of the people behind some of the latest innovations, models, and new products coming out of Google. Emma, I'm super excited for this conversation. You're one of my favorite people to work with at Google, mostly because you love shipping stuff, moving quickly, all that good stuff. Do you want to kick it off with just a super quick intro of what you've worked on at Google, who you are, and also today, like what you're focused on?
Sure. I started working at Google as an intern 19 years ago. I worked on most things the company runs on, from file systems, ads, search backend, search quality, Vertex AI, or what was before Cloud AI, Cloud Vision, news, real-time detection of events, and sort of more recently on everything involving large language models and generative AI launches, from the initial BARD launch all the way to sort of like Gemini 8B. And I worked on all aspects of the system, from being on call for training runs to working very directly on serving them efficiently in production, to making changes to the sort of internal transformer architecture like quantization, model charting, and so on and so forth. And if you want to see more, you can go to LinkedIn.
I love that. No, that actually is super, super helpful context, because I think it speaks to, and maybe we'll sort of push into this later on in the conversation, but like part of my takeaway of why you're so effective inside of Google is actually because you have all of that context. Like you've built a lot of the infrastructure, and like someone might say like, this is going to take 6 weeks or whatever. And then you're always like, no, I built that part of the system. Like it should only take, like, shipping this SKU config change should take 12 hours because, I actually built the infrastructure to do it. So I feel like that is one of your internal superpowers is you have that context and you know how a bunch of these systems work. I'm curious, like, what your sort of broad take is on sort of where we are with Gemini today versus like a year ago when, at this point, Gemini hadn't actually even been announced yet. Have things sort of tracked the way that you would have expected from a traction standpoint? Do you think we're like finally getting the like machine that makes the model spun up, all of that stuff? I'm curious where your head is.
You're asking the wrong person about planning. You were very kind before. Because you worked on it, you kind of know how long it takes. My take on it is I'm overly optimistic and always late, but then somehow it ships ahead of schedule. Like last year where we were in the same micro kitchen here in this like sort of like 10 like looking building, and sort of working very closely with a bunch of folks from our London office that were very nice and sort of like came here and worked with us. And then sort of we did the same in January this year. And then, sort of like critical infrastructure things kind of weren't really working and were launching. So was, uncomfortably excited, to quote someone really famous. But then sort of somehow it all worked, right? And then we ended up having a really, really good sort of launch in December last year. And then we were able to follow very quickly in February, and then March, and then sort of IO, and then, Astra, and then, we keep having surprises in store, right? So that's actually pretty awesome. It's where are we now? Again, it's a very biased opinion because I'm in the middle of it. So like I work with all of these folks, and at this point they're like, kind of my extended family. So again, very biased answer. So I do like it where it's going, right? And yeah, I'm pretty bullish, right? Like if we did one thing fairly well as a company was sort of like starting, and then sort of like just incrementally launching and making the system better, right? Like if you look at how we started with like, sort of universal search in 2006, or like Psychic, which is search as you type, which is people outside know as suggest and stuff like that. Again, people are like, it will never work. Oh my God, you're going to use so much sort of like compute power, so many resources. How would you make it work? And I haven't met an infrastructure problem we weren't able to crack. So I am pretty bullish.
really interested to get your take on this, like system versus model situation, and like how much value in the future is actually going to be created like by the quote unquote model weights themselves versus like the actual system that surrounds the model. And I think my take, at least from joining Google, is like there's actually a like almost near infinite amount of value that you can create by building the system and the infrastructure around the models. And I feel like some of the like, I don't know what your perspective is on this, but it feels like long context is almost, there is model innovation to enable long context, but it's actually an infrastructure problem to like make it work at scale and reliably and at a cost that developers are excited about.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
right on all accounts, it wasn't an easy infrastructure launch. I still am not terribly happy with sort of like how everything worked out, and sort of like we do have kinks to iron out, especially on like like cost model for caching, the interface to the cache API, and so on and so forth. Right, you know them very well, including like sort of like the finer details, like kind of the examples we show, sort of how well they work, how easy it is for people to understand. So we do realize we have a little bit of work to be done there, to be generous, right, with the characterization. But I do think that the sort of like infrastructure behind it is actually pretty solid. And we will do what we do, which is gradually improve it, right? So sort of like don't sort of do a launch and then don't do a follow up. So I think it's very important to get good infrastructure in place. That being said, infrastructure by itself without a really strong model is just, it's a nice engineering accomplishment, but it doesn't really serve anyone, right? So like users should get real value from this. The real value comes from like what the models do and how well they're integrated with the rest of our offerings, right? Like from like, workspace apps all the way to sort of like, search, and then Gemini app.
Yeah, I completely
So I
agree.
think both equally important.
Yeah, I think you're spot on. One other quick, maybe slightly controversial question before we talk about Flash AP stuff, which I'm super excited to dive more into the details of. If you like back to this narrative of like where we are with the sort of machine that trains the model, I'm curious if you have, if there was one thing that we could kind of just flip a switch and like change about how the model process, like from pre-training to post-training to all the infrastructure work happens. If we could just make one of these things work, uh it would sort of be a huge unlock for us getting models out the door, or even like it could be an external facing thing as far as like one feature that you think would really sort of unlock a lot more use cases that just like isn't there yet from a capability standpoint.
Yeah, that's a fair question. I think like sort of look again, can it be done better? Yes, absolutely. Can we do it without sort of like an excessive amount of time spent on details and getting stuff right and making sure it runs in production? No, not that sort of like how quickly the entire field is moving. And this is a very sort of exciting space to be in, and like-minded people sort of gravitate toward each other, and that's basically the team, right? But like if I were to fix one thing, I would be like, kind of like being a little bit more bold with like what we want to put out in our products, and then sort of like explain it sort of like very clear, like, hey, this is an experimental, and sort of, like doing absolutely everything humanly possible on our end to come up with something really useful for the end users. And then, maybe apologizing a little bit in advance if there are imperfections to it, right? And I do think that's a very tricky balance to achieve, but like it's something that we should probably do sort of like better going forward, right? So sort of like as opposed to kind of like letting launches sit for a little bit too long, kind of like being a bit faster with them to market, and then also like taking some informed disclaimers around them, and then sort of like polishing up a little bit the failure cases, right, for them.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think I think it's also extremely tricky to sort of strike that balance in the developer world, because in a lot of cases we're telling people, hey, actually go and build your company on this thing. So, but I do agree. I think there's a balance, and we're probably teetered. We're always teetered somewhere, and I think somewhere in the wrong direction. Whether it's move slower or faster, and constantly needing to reset ourselves. So I hear you on that.
Yeah, I mean, like it's complex. It's a global consumer company, right? Like it has a huge responsibility. Like it or not, it will be a double standard, right? Like what we do versus like what some other shop does, right? So sort of like all of these have to be considered. This is not finding excuses about like why certain things take longer than desired to hit the market, but it's just like I mean, like we're more than 3 people working on this thing, so we should probably be doing it faster, right? Like that's basically the takeaway.
So Flash AP, developers are really excited. We landed this model after a ton of work internally by you, by all of the GDM teams who are training the model, by everyone else across cloud who helped sort of get this model out the door. Why did we do this? Like, what was the point of us releasing this model? You were a super strong advocate. I think if it hadn't been for you pushing in all those channels that we had, we likely would not have launched this model. So where did the conviction come from? Why did we make this model to begin with? Tell us part of that story.
Yeah, sure. I mean, like, it started literally when we're doing the long context launch, right, in like January, February this year, and sort of like all of us were focusing on like, Pro, and how do we get like 1.5 Pro be like the very best model out there, and then sort of work on this capability. And then sort of like at that point, like folks weren't even considering should we do something like Flash, but like, no, hang on, like let's do Flash because this brings a lot of value. It's going to be a super strong model, and sort of like, there are clear use cases for which Pro will be used. So that has a very clear sort of market sort of definition or market segment that really wants that particular model. They're also very sort of like high volume use cases for which a smaller, cheaper model that's also extremely capable on those particular type of queries work very well, right? So then we did Flash, and then, like the next thing was like, well, I really want to be able to experiment to like, like post-training or sort of like experimented in like very large QPS settings, something that's extremely simple. I alluded to this before, like things that are coupled very directly in the retrieval flow or sort of like in the main system that does the sort of like, inverted index search and sorting of our results. Can we actually start deploying models at that end of the spectrum, right? So that's basically where, like, if you look at it, you go like, well, like this 8B is a very interesting SKU, and it gives us a lot of flexibility, right? Like from deploying it to sort of users' devices, which was kind of like the intended target, to sort of like actually running it internally for data center workloads that like really are hundreds of thousands of queries per second or more, right? So then from there on to like, hey, I wonder if it does the long context trick as well, like, and how good it is it compared to like the bigger one, right? Like then it becomes an interesting engineering challenge. So then sort of like, like a couple of people sort of, we worked on it and we kind of got the initial sort of like configurations for it done in March. And then it sort of, as you very nicely pointed out, took a little bit of time to kind of figure out like how we want to place it, how we want to launch it, right? Like sort of on the same topic that probably we should launch things a little bit faster kind of going forward. Yeah. So that's basically where it came from. Made sense. And then, very little marketing seems is very used, right? So I guess, yeah, there you go. Yay, validation.
I love that. Why? Was it just like the natural, like obvious thing to do to make an 8 billion parameter model? I had asked on Twitter if people had questions about this conversation and the story for 8B, and there was some questions about like what a lot of companies have 8 billion parameter models. Is there like something natural that sort of happens in the model training process at 8 billion parameters, or do you have an intuition behind why 8B is like seems to work reasonably well across the ecosystem?
Again, you're asking the wrong person, right? Like sort of like last year I said, hey, nobody's thinking that we should be putting LLMs on phones, right? So we started like kind of like the Nano series, like at Google, like because like we kind of have a very strong ecosystem. We want to do something both for developers and for our like first party partners. So then basically, sort of like, hey, how do we sort of take this one step further, where like folks maybe haven't considered that we can actually do it on phones, and then have something that like rather than serving a few 100,000 or so requests per second, could be distributed to like 2 billion users pretty much instantly, right? So that was the motivation for doing these sort of like smaller on-device models. We initially started like GenV1 on device. We initially we had something like based on the ULM architecture, but then we're like, well, like we kind of already have Gemini. Let's just do Gemini. Let's push this forward. And then kind of like, you have 4B and then you have 8B. So these are sort of like very natural evolutions because the device capabilities also change. And, changing the hardware specifications for the phones, I mean, that will take a while, right? So sort of like while we sort of change the domain as we go along, we also change the type of models we're building, right? So we get a lot of experience on like compressed models, spectrum, if you want, with like techniques for serving them efficiently from something like high-end phones. But then sort of like we also look at them and then figure out that, oh, wow, these are actually useful in some shape or form for the internal workloads we have as well. And, with the usual tricks that come with them, right? Like routing queries between models, cascading serving, and so on and so forth, right? So, if you say, hey, like, did you really place this 8B like 2 years ago and you had the plan to get there? Like, my answer is like a very quick and short no. But then sort of like things move pretty quickly. And then it seemed like a good point in time. So then we did it. And then, other products like, from Gemini app, AI overviews, workspace, and so on and so forth found value in this particular SKU. And yes, we continue building them. May or may not be 8B going forward.
One of the things that was impressive about this launch sequence was going back to this narrative of like you pushing to get this thing out the door. The sort of memory that sticks in my mind was just like the weekly post in the temp ship flash AP channel where you were like, "Are we shipping it this week? Like what's happening? Like what's getting this out the door? What's the blocker?" I'm curious, like sort of maybe. Less specific to this launch, or we can use this launch as an anecdotal example. I think that skill of sort of navigating the complexity of organizations to get things out the door is something that you innately have. Well, do you have advice for people, even just for me personally, as somebody who isn't who's newer to Google, about like what has historically worked well to do that? Is it like finding the right coalition of people, which I know there's a ton of people inside GDM and other places inside of Google who believed in AP? Like, do you have any like sort of advice from that perspective?
Yeah, I mean, like good karma. I mean, I worked with a lot of the people for a long time. So that's one, right? It's sort of like it's something that, you don't let people hanging out to dry and sort of they know they can launch stuff with you. Um, so street cred, I guess that's one, right? So, and then the second is just work in full bandwidth, right? Like, I mean, nothing off the table, basically, right? And then I think people respond really well, and then makes everything work pretty efficiently, even if I'm annoying sometimes, right? Like as I was, which is, hey, why aren't we shipping? Why we have so many people involved in like sort of saying a yay or a nay here and things like that. But I do think in all transparency, it is good to call inefficiencies both at the system level as well as the organizational level. And, like blameless postmortems, it's a thing we have as a company, and then use that to sort of like incrementally improve what we do, right? Like, I mean, it's the thing that has worked fairly well over the past, I mean, I know it for 19 years and they've done it before I joined as an intern for quite some time. And it seems like it's somewhat unique to us. And, barring that, go on a run, which we never did, and
I'm
go on a
sorry.
hike, and a lot of sort of like imperfections get sorted out like that as well, right? Or a lunch, right? I mean, it's common practice, I guess.
Yeah, when I posted that we were, I don't know if this was Jeff who posted this, but he was something about like the thousands of cappuccinos or espresso shots that he's had with you in the Blue Micro Kitchen over the years. And I feel like that actually makes a ton of sense. Like at the end of the day, like I think people believe what you say, which is part of the reason why you're so effective at getting this stuff out the door. But you have to earn that credit of being someone who people sort of respect and want to listen to. So it's wonderful that you've earned that. You made a comment before about back on the um, sort of narrative of getting Flash AB out the door. You made a comment about long context for AP, and I think this is actually one of the most surprising things to me. And I don't know if this is like just the fundamental architecture of Gemini is such that all of the capabilities sort of carry down between models, and without sort of giving away the secret sauce of how we make the magic happen at Google. How is it possible that the model can do long context? And the answer might be we can't talk about it, but I feel like that's the most impressive thing, is that the model, even at 8 billion parameters, can do a million token context length and actually like perform pretty reasonably well in those queries.
I mean, it's magic. Uh, but we do have a fairly good set of principles that we do sort of model architecture design and development on. We insist quite a bit that they are, respected at all sizes of the models. This is not something unknown in the industry, like scaling ladder and things like that. And then, yes, there will be capability differences between them as the model capacity increases, right? But some of them we sort of are able to make these transfers from larger models to the smaller ones, right? So um, I would say it's a combination of techniques that we use, and sort of in the 8B case, we had a fairly decent spot of model capacity and sort of transferable learnings from larger models that we could pull this off fairly decently.
That
So
makes
we
sense.
don't
And
develop each model in isolation basically from everything else, because then that will not be a recipe for success, in my opinion.
yeah, I agree with you. And I actually think this a bunch of the other questions that folks asked in the comments when I posted the tweet that we were talking was around sort of whether or not any of the innovation from AP and things like that carries over to the Gemma models. And just as a random side comment, like that is the sort of value that Google is offering, which is we take all the sort of learnings from scaling these models on the Gemini side, and a lot of that same innovation ends up in the Gemma open source models. Um, which is awesome to see. Part of this, again, back to this narrative of getting this model out the door. You were originally, and not to out you and on this, but you were pushing to make this model free. The price point ended up being super reasonable from a developer perspective, but I actually think there's a sort of independent of the outcome of the price for the specific Flash AP model that we've released. I think there's perhaps like a trend that you were sort of underscoring with the push to make things free, which is, you know, the compute cost to run these models, especially with smaller models, like more and more intelligence is able to be compressed into smaller models. The sort of efficiency of scale is kicking in across serving these models, training these models, and ultimately, actually, if you look at a lot of other technologies, people aren't required to sort of like when I go use CPUs across, the hundreds of different software products that I use every day, like I'm actually not usually bearing a lot of that cost. Like at scale, CPUs are offered for free across hundreds and millions of products everywhere. And like it actually would make sense that that same thing will happen with potentially small models, small AI models on GPUs, TPUs, et cetera. Does that capture your point of view, or am I missing some piece of it?
Um, it does, right? Like one of the very exciting things over the past 2 years, 2.5 years of me working flat out in this area, was to see the cost compression, right? Like, so sort of like, or best to look at it as how much quality can you get in a particular energy footprint, which is sort of like how much energy do you need to serve a particular level of quality to the end user, right? And it's been amazing. It's been quite a ride. I've seen it sort of like when we are like really scaling our index from a few billion documents to like hundreds of billions of documents like 18 years ago. And then sort of like I've seen it now, right? So like given the trend and given everything that I witnessed very directly by virtue of working on all of the details of these launches, I mean, the next thing is, sort of like giving this to as many people and developers as possible for basically as low as possible as a cost, right? So sort of like, you can't beat free. So we can start there, right? I mean, like I guess you could pay people to use your stuff, but maybe we don't get into that. But sort of like you can't beat free, right? So sort of like it sort of like massively allows people to understand what the technology does with like very little commitment on their end, right? And you just rely on their sort of like judgment. How do you stack up against sort of everything else that's in the field? And it's an exciting field because there's like rabid competition here, right? Which is really, really nice. So allowing people to make a sort of like very low commitment judgment call between you and your competition, I think it's invaluable. So we should strive doing that. And the other one is, like we have long context, having a very cheap, again, you can't beat free, way of playing with long context and seeing what it does and sort of like trying novel integrations with it, like, there will be glimmers of what it can do, right? There will be glimmers of like, hey, this actually works really well for me, and this is how I build like my app or like my company, and great, we've helped somebody, right? So there's like that satisfaction is priceless. The other one is, hey, it kind of works on all of these cases. I really need the more capable model and longer context for these other cases, right? And at that point, we also help the business because like that will generate revenue, right? Like again, that's basically what sort of like drives all of us forward. This balance between user satisfaction and sort of like the company actually running, right?
Yeah.
So that's basically why I'm pushing for like, hey, we've seen the cost compression. I very directly worked on orders of magnitude improvements in efficiency over the past 2 years. Like let's just kind of like make this obvious to our end users as well as much as possible.
Yeah. This is my obligatory insert that the Google AI Studio is free. You can try the latest sort of generation models all for free. Like there is no cost. There's no payment to use AI Studio. You can try the long context window, the 1 million, 2 million context window. It's all free. Same thing with the API, most generous API free tier. 1,500 requests per day. You can use long context with Flash AB and actually kick the tires on seeing what this model is capable of. And I think removing that economic barrier for developers to get started, I think is to your point, I think super, super important, because you get to that moment of actually realizing that long context and, models being natively multimodal and all the other innovation that's coming actually does unlock all these super, super interesting use cases that you actually can't build with other models and in other ecosystems. So hopefully we're sort of at least doing a little bit of justice to this vision that you have. Do you think there's an opportunity to go even smaller? That was another question that came up. Like, could we do a 4B model and serve it at scale? Like, would we be like, does the trend of sort of continuing to compress knowledge even smaller break down at a certain point?
I mean, we did, right? Like previous generation, we were kind of around 4B. I mean, I'm not sure to what extent this is known versus not known, but we kind of did do that. We did use that model very extensively internally as well. We found very novel use cases for it, which were like, actually surprising, some of them to me as well. Like, hey, can it do this? Yes, it can very well, right? So simplified a lot of our stack before, for instance, for, examining the generated responses, right? And I'm not going to say more, but like, rather than using 10 or 20 different systems, we can use like one of these models, and sort of like when you sort of like cross all the T's, dot all the I's, the cost ends up being significantly lower than sort of like a very sprawling infrastructure deployment to kind of like run all of these sidecar almost like systems that we need to in order to ensure a particular quality and sort of format of the response to the users. So yeah, we did see it. We are continuing to press on this, right? Like we shouldn't aim of having LLMs only on, high end phones, only for the people that afford these phones, right? Like again, sort of back to like 2 minutes and 30 seconds ago, we should sort of put this in the hands of as many people as possible for, you can't beat free, but close to free. So we strongly believe in the smaller model scale, right? Like this is not to say we're only going to release like tiny models, like, they have to come from somewhere, and sort of like the breakthroughs are very oftenly made at the larger scale of the spectrum, right? So sort of like the ultras, the pros, the sort of like the like lots and lots of compute intensity spent on the largest models actually transfer pretty decently to the smaller scale.
You were a proponent of the Flash AP name. I'm curious. I've seen a bunch of feedback that people are confused about the name. Not to solely put that on you. I think the decision was sort of legacy from the Gemini 1.5 technical report of us using that name. You also report to Jeff, who is his sort of side hustle is supposedly coming up with good names for stuff. So I'm curious, if we hadn't have called it Flash AP, what is the name that you would have suggested we go with?
I mean, I suggested Flash AB. It was there for the taking, and like I was like, oh my god, we're gonna spend a month debating the name. which more or less happened. And I'm not going to give more details here, but then we ended up with Flash 8B. Yay, huge success. And then we know, what if we do one that's larger? Well, like then we just, I mean, we can call it still 8B. But just partly joking, or maybe not joking. But I mean, I think it's a good name, right? Like a name is a name, right? Like we should sort of like use more of our models, in my opinion, to generate the names for the stuff that we want to ship out. That would be pretty neat. Or we can use the sort of like the date that we first put it into AI Studio, right? Like generate a little competition across our products as well, who ships fastest, and then they get to name it, right? Like imagine this Gemini, I don't know, like 010135, basically, right? Like for a model that we're gonna release in the year 2035 or 3035 or something like that, right? So that's all the insight into the Flash in B1, right? Like we had Flash, and then what do you want to call this? Spark, Swift, Mini Flash, Mini Spark.
You were pro calling it Sparky. I vividly remember you saying that we should call it
I mean, I
Sparky.
threw a bunch of stuff at the wall, see what sticks, right? And like, there you go.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I do like the idea that the team that ships the model first gets to decide the name. I feel like that would set up some interesting
Yeah,
incentives for teams to move quickly. I feel like maybe we'll adopt that with the forthcoming model launches.
yeah, that would be pretty neat, right? Like you get to name it with your project and the day that it shipped, and it's there for people to see who shipped it first, right? Like who took a bet on it, basically. Good or bad, right? Like I think this will focus quite a lot of attention to details across all of the products, shipping stuff, right? Because A, they'll get their name there. B, it should be a good launch.
This is wonderful. Just before I go to a bunch of other rapid fire questions and get your closing thoughts. Anything else from the Flash 8B sort of narrative or story that rings in your mind? Any other like hopeful thoughts for how people will use the model? Anything like that to close with?
Yeah, I mean, like I think one word really sticks with me, right? Like just sort of relentless, right? Like sort of like constant pressure, basically. Right. Like, I mean, you know it very well. Like on the flight to sort of London in June, sort of like sending out these sort of serving configs and the initial optimizations from it while landing and while getting sort of like, side glances from the cabin crew saying, hey, you really need to stow your laptop. And I'm like, the wireless still works. So like these kind of things, I mean, like they're making it really fun to work here, and they also help a lot the clip of launches, right? And while I am all for like long-term planning in particular sort of sectors of activity, some of them move a lot faster than others, like this particular Gen AI thing. And I do think sort of like it's an exciting place to be in, right? So sort of like relentless, constant pressure in sort of like shipping stuff out very, very quickly. This really drives the innovation engine, right? Like so sometimes breakthroughs can be made completely independently from like the main pressures of productionizing and shipping. But oftentimes I've seen in my career that the biggest breakthroughs are done in sort of like pressure cooker like environments, right? So I'm really looking forward to the next line of models.
So am I. I feel like the world is looking forward to it. I also think that you know I wouldn't describe it as the pressure cooker environment, though I don't sit there every day. But I feel like the blue micro kitchen and gradient canopy, for anyone in DeepMind or folks who are familiar, is I think one of the most magical places right now. Like there's just so many interesting people who are actually like building the frontier, and it feels like there's like something special in the espresso machine that sits there that's sort of fueling. That espresso machine is having an outsized impact on world GDP as far as like keeping researchers and everyone sort of uh, fully caffeinated.
And like full disclosure, we did carry it from like 2008 when we installed it outside, I think at that point, Marissa's office in building 43. We carried it with us across the many buildings we've been to. It's a bit jaded now, like sort of like if you look at the sides of it, right? So it's an older model, but still like it performs really well, and we love it. And yeah, it's intense fun and like intense sort of uncomfortably excited, I guess, all of us, right? That again describes it pretty well, right? I mean, I don't know how else to sort of place it, but it can be fun and generate results at the same time and be nonstop, which is what it is.
I'm going to go to a bunch of rapid fire questions from that people sent in from the audience. So hopefully we can get some rapid fire answers from you as well. One of the questions was, will some of the same techniques that we used for Flash AP use for Gemma? We talked about that. That's sort of the general philosophy. The second question was Gemini 2.0. Anything you can tell us about Gemini 2.0?
Yeah. So on the Gemma side, yes, we've been to Paris like 2-3 weeks ago, sort of like exactly working very closely with Gemma team. Again, this is like, hey, let's make this accessible to as many users as possible. We have to do this in a way where, like, not too much from what we're doing internally on proprietary models gets released too early and things like that. But we do believe very firmly in having a very strong Gemma offering. And sort of like we do see that helping the ecosystem, and sort of like we're very intentional about like how we want to do it, like the type of changes we want to release. So yes, it's a resounding yes, absolutely. We're working very closely. It's basically part of the one team. And then sort of like we want to make sure that we have very good open source models as well, that sort of developers can get insights into like, hey, what else should we try, right? Like if anything else that brings everyone along. On sort of like 2.0, really good models and a ton of work in serving them efficiently, which is what we're doing now. But I'll just leave it at that.
I love it. Another question that came in, is 8B a mixture of expert and model? I don't know if we have revealed any of these details in the technical report, so we can punt
I don't
if.
think we have, and I don't think we're going to start now. So then we can move to the next one.
I love it. Another question, why is there no 002 version of the 8B model? We shipped an 002 version of the latest Flash and Pro models, and this was one of the questions that came in.
I don't know, we blinked. There you go. Sorry, very quick answer. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah,
There's
awesome.
a serving war room.
I'll double check the 002 store. I think the simple answer is we haven't shipped a second version, a second stable version. But yeah, I do think it is somewhat confusing that we have 001 and 002 at the same time. So we'll keep pushing on naming models better, which is tough.
Again, I'm like just sort of like upvoting my suggestion, and I think someone else said the same thing, which is like we could change what we named them. Dates seem like pretty good. Dates and products seem again pretty good. So then they'll be like, hey, why isn't Gemini app shipping a newer release of this particular model? And then sort of we'll be like, hey, go talk to Gemini.
I think I'm aligned. Let's do dated version for the next model release series. So we'll consider that decision locked in.
Sergey had the same idea as well. Like I think it's a great idea. We should probably push on this, right? So
I'm with you. Another question: why do smaller models tend to hallucinate more? Is it just like the sort of knowledge is compressed and they know less?
Maybe. It's a good question. I do think sort of like the smaller models, we also like, if you want, tune them more intently on specific use cases, right? Like sort of like things like summarization. I think a lot of these is fairly known, right? Sort of like it comes with pluses and minuses, right? Like it can make it more extractive and thus keep it more grounded, but also like hurts other capabilities in the model, and it's a balance we have to strike. But think of it as the smaller the model, the larger scale application we're sort of using it for, the more finely tuned for particular use cases they are. This is not to say that small models don't have really, really good general capabilities that sort of, like pick your favorite benchmark, right? Because there's so many of them and so many of them are already saturated, right? Like, but to the extent that's still worthwhile picking, have a benchmark, look at what sort of, models that were like 2 orders of magnitude larger or an order of and a half magnitude larger were a year and a half or 2 years ago were achieving on those benchmarks, and compare them with the smaller models. And yes, like, caveats around distillation and all this that everyone already kind of knows by now. But it's quite amazing what has happened here, right? So
yeah, no, I agree with you. 2 questions. My second to last question, on a slightly creative note, if you had to use a billion tokens of Flash 8B every single day for the next year, what would you spend those tokens on? This could be your personal life. This could be solving some work problem, but you have to use it. It has to be an at billion token scale problem. It can't be like summarize emails.
Yeah, retrieval augmentation, right? Like again, I'm biased. I'm a hardcore search infrastructure slash quality slash news person. So this is what I would use it for, right? Like access all my personal information, help me make sense of it, help me organize it, help me use it effectively in day to day, right? Like, I mean, it's a huge inflection point in humanity. We should really make sure it's actually very useful for the end user, right? Like the amount of time it saves is ridiculous, right? Like if done right. So I think, we should press on this as much as possible. Again, this is my pet project. This is what I would like to do with them. Who's to say I'm not working on this already? And I'll leave it at that.
I love that. And the beautiful part is it would probably only cost you a couple of dollars a day if you were actually running that at billion token scale. Emma, this has been wonderful. The final question, and then I'm excited to get off this call and get back to work. And hopefully I'll see you in a couple of weeks. We can go for our run. Um, what is keeping you excited about, continuing to push and get these models out the door at Google? Like, is there, is it that narrative that you just mentioned of sort of retrieval augmented generation at scale? Like, what is the thing that is uh, getting you up in the morning and excited?
It varies morning by morning, right? Like, did the last night export succeed or not? Okay, if it didn't, then maybe we start looking at it at 3 a.m., right? Like, it's the set of people I work with, and it's the sort of step function in humanity this thing does, right? Like peeling everything away, right? Like that's basically what makes me very motivated to work on it. And there are so many places in the world where you can have this type of impact, right? So like, I mean, like from an engineering perspective, I mean, what more can one ask for?
Yeah, I love that. Emma, this was an awesome conversation. Thank you for taking the time out of the busy 8 to 8 workday. I'm excited. Hopefully we'll have more cool stuff shipping. We'll have you back on. And yeah, thanks for all the hard work.
Definitely holding you up to the Strava run. We have to do like kind of like our little route here. We'll arrange it to sort of fit in, kid drop off and stuff like that in the morning, but we should make it happen.
We will make it happen. That's the easiest problem that we have to solve. So I appreciate it, Emma. I'll see you later.
Bye. Thank you. Bye.
So that was a wonderful conversation. I'm so glad that I got a chance to hear from Emma. Hopefully, you all enjoyed the conversation too. And for me, candidly, part of the motivation to do this conversation, to start this video series, was actually seeing the disconnect in public perception around sort of the pace in which Google is moving, and what I've experienced firsthand since I joined Google. So I'm hopeful that this was sort of an interesting look behind the scenes as far as what actually happens at Google, what it takes to get things out the door. And also just another quick note, which is it really does take a village of people to land some of these launches. I think me and Emma sort of talked about this and represented a lot of people's work, but it really does take like so many hardworking, amazing people inside of Google who I'm fortunate enough to get to call teammates. Shipping stuff, and especially shipping great stuff, really is a team sport. So I'm excited that we get to continue to do this.